doctor said, "Did he get a little touchy?" And she said, "No, I had to make sure he wasn't dead." I suppose there are many ways that we, as human beings, distinguish ourselves from other people. Ways we divide and label people. Morally speaking, we call some people good and others bad. In political conversations, and by some odd chance religious discussions as well, though I don't really understand it, we label one group far right conservative and the other far left liberal. Getting close to where we live, we tend to label a person either in Jackson County, West Virginia, a Viking or a Red Devil. And I won't say anything more about that. However, from a spiritual point of view, the way we tend to separate and divide are by Christian versus non-Christian. We have learned that beyond all other distinguishing marks, that this is the one that has more implications than anything else. Though this is biblical, sometimes I fear it can, for us, become misleading. What I mean by that is this. It has nothing to do with who we claim to follow, Jesus, but it has everything to do with our habit of turning a functional title of Christian into a mere name badge. We're happy to wear something that identifies us with people that we share beliefs with, people that we share values with. But somewhere along the line, we lose this sense of responsibility to our own spiritual lives and then also to the spiritual lives of others in the church. In other words, we are Christian by name only and not in action. It's almost like we've become like dead relics to the cause of Christ. We say that we believe and that we follow, but our lives don't show that. There's this book that I read recently, and that I may have mentioned a time or two in the past, written by Kyle Idleman. And just a simple title, Not a Fan. And in it, he in turn labels people in two ways. Not necessarily as Christian and non-Christian, though that's part of it, but by the label of fan versus follower. In this type of language, even many Christians don't make the cut as followers. They're simply fans. This is because there are Christians who believe they wear a title when actually the faith they identify with requires more than just pinning a badge to their chest. Fan versus follower becomes a more effective way of separating people because it requires that one is committed, willing to sacrifice. And this happens to be what turns most of us away when Christian faith in life becomes something that we have to give up in return for. Whereas many Christians sign up for benefits, followers leave everything that has ever mattered to them behind and pick up crosses to imitate Jesus, who picked up his own cross, who had nothing and died for everyone. Don't misunderstand what this book is about. Fans are good people. All Christians seem to be good people. And they are good Christian people. But they aren't quite as dedicated to their faith that they claim to have in Jesus. This book, a couple quotes that I like from it. He says, Jesus was never interested in having fans. When he defines what kind of relationship he wants with others, enthusiastic admirer is not an option. And he also says this, which I like. My concern is that many of our churches in America have gone from being sanctuaries to becoming stadiums, where they cheer for Jesus but have no interest in truly following him. And this startles me because though we call ourselves Christians, sometimes we don't show it. Fan versus follower. in connection with this that I think demonstrates the difference between a fan and follower in this guy's eyes. And that's found in John chapter 3. I do want to make mention of a couple verses before that in chapter 2, but for the most part, we know this story. We know about this guy Nicodemus and his conversation with Jesus, so I want to look at that. I think this story in particular maybe helps this idea of fan and follower really come alive. Because it was Jesus on many occasions who would have a lot of conversations with people that were more than just about simple facts about Scripture and what does this mean, but really assessing people's faith, their dedication, their level of commitment to what he wanted for people. And this is what he talks about with Nicodemus. In the early chapters of John's Gospel, we read of this conversation between Nicodemus, who was, to some extent, a high-ranking official in Judaism. The text says that he was a member of the Jewish ruling council, so probably maybe on the Sanhedrin that we read about a lot in the book of Acts. So he was very religious. Don't miss that. Sometimes fans today are very religious, but yet still don't have that dedication. In chapter 2, in verse 23, we read that there was a festival in Jerusalem. The text says Passover. And it says, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. And so, man, those are the results you want. You want people to believe in what you have to say. And yet, Jesus, verse 24, would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. Jesus demonstrates in John 2 how he turns water into wine and then the cleansing of the temple. And so he does these amazing things that people can't help but believe and be amazed by. But in other words, these are just a bunch of fans. People who gave their applause and adoration, but nothing more than that. As his popularity increased, large crowds of admirers began to join his fan club, in so many words. And yet it was Jesus who was immediately aware of their superficial faith that really was present. For in John 2 and verse 24, and I put this up here because there's a subtle distinction. The word that the text says the people believed is the same word that in verse 24 is Jesus did not entrust himself, because the word can mean believe or trust. And so it's almost like it's saying this, that they didn't fully trust, they fully didn't commit to Jesus, and so he wasn't really completely trusting and committing towards them. And so that's the sad reality. Many fans, but not many followers. These people were amazed by Jesus' power and believed that he was sent from God. Nicodemus even says so much in chapter 3, verse 2, when he says, "You're a teacher, come from God. Who can do these signs unless God is with him?" But they didn't possess the level of dedication needed to be grounded followers. And so they saw the signs, they believed, but they didn't commit. It appears that Nicodemus could be a spokesman from this group. Because, we read these couple verses and then immediately is the narrative. And so maybe they sent Nicodemus. Maybe Nicodemus had seen all the signs, all the wonders in the temple and at the wedding. And he comes to Jesus to know more. He's engaging Jesus maybe to discover what type of follower Jesus wants. The writer records that Nicodemus approached him at night. And, maybe it was because he was afraid people might see him. Probably not so much. But more likely just the fact that Jesus had a lot of people around him throughout the day. And maybe he waited till everyone went home, the sun went down, for him to really engage in this back and forth conversation. And so he talks to Jesus. always struggle keeping up with my slides. Nicodemus found himself hard pressed between religious prominence and commitment to Jesus, which begs the question, what's the difference? And also, I think, can you have both? Can you choose both? These questions Jesus answers in more detail throughout his ministry. For Jesus, faith in God means more than just ritual and sacrifice and keeping commands, but it's engaging heart and mind in sacrificial, heartfelt service. A religious official like Nicodemus represented this disconnect from religion for God and relationship with God. No doubt he had quite the relationship with religion. A prominent Jew in his own day, had all these connections, had this great public image of being this great guy, great keeper of the law, and yet wasn't enough. No heart, no deep committed faith, not a follower, simply a fan. And so, as they converse, we find out a little bit more about Nicodemus and his lack of true faith. The way Nicodemus addresses Jesus, he even kind of shows his belief in who he thinks Jesus is. He hadn't worked out all the details, certainly, but his comment of, Rabbi, we know you're a teacher come from God, certainly puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that Nicodemus at least is aware that, hey, Jesus is a special guy. But whether I'm going to commit to him, I really don't think so. This is the faith that is not good enough. This is the faith that Jesus views as worthless. It's not just understanding who he is, but understanding what he wants. Trading in religion, one's religious income for Nicodemus, his respect, even his family and friends, is what Jesus wants. And certainly, that's the challenge. That we give up everything that we've held dear to us for so long in exchange for something more important. And though maybe we live our lives as 21st century Americans, and we never face a day where we have to really give up something like that in such a dramatic way. And yet, faith is something that is there, that is willing to do that when times get difficult, when challenges come our way. And we'll be tested, maybe not in that same way, but I do think we'll be tested. Before Nicodemus even has a chance to ask a question, Jesus gives him what he's really looking for. John 3, verse 3, "Verily, truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." And just like he saw into the hearts of the crowds of those fans in John 2, he sees right into the hidden thoughts of this Jewish man. Nicodemus, who had witnessed the kingdom of God come with great power in the form of Jesus, in his ministry, in his wonderful works, in this divine action through this one Jewish man, Jesus, he still was labeled as unfit for the kingdom because Jesus says he hadn't been born again. And so, which raises the question, what does born again mean? For Nicodemus, a Jewish individual, he went off to school, memorized most of the Old Testament, knew all the laws, knew all the rituals. He knew everything about religion, but not so much about quite a resume. Philippians chapter 2, Paul kind of gives his resume. He said, I'm a Pharisee, or Philippians 3, I'm a Pharisee of Pharisees. I've done all these great things for the name of God, but not really for my relationship with God. Nicodemus is faced with the reality that he must start completely over in his life. His prestigious religious resume is not good enough. In God's eyes, one must be reborn. And here's this challenging concept that we live our lives a certain way, that we've grown up to believe certain things, that people have put so much stock in our lives, and yet Christianity calls us to give all that up in a sense. That we undergo this rebirth where priorities change. Commitments don't look the same. Things that didn't matter to us matter so much more. And so this concept of a new birth in which one is born not only a second time, but is born from heaven. The word in verse 3, born again, again can also mean from above. And so it comes from heaven, but it also is talking about another. Logistically, this makes no sense to us and to Nicodemus, as we see in the text. In 3 and verse 4, he has his stark reaction. How can someone be born again? Can he enter into his mother's womb another time? And Nicodemus, as we see, is made aware that this is not becoming a child once again, but is something that involves inward transformation. Born again speaks to a radical change of life, starting over with one's sense of identity, priorities, purpose, and commitment. And all this finds its source in God. Born again, born from above. And so for us, I think the challenge is this, to think carefully that if a man of the caliber of Nicodemus, with his gifts, knowledge, position, and integrity, could not readily enter the kingdom by virtue and works, then who are we to think it is by what and how much we do and how well we do it that will give us entrance into God's grace and favor? Jesus continues with this dialogue by clarifying his first statement in verse 5, where he says, "Verily, truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and the Spirit." And to put it in terms we can understand, I think this is just a parallel to verse 3, where the kingdom of God necessitates that we're born again, means the same thing as the expression born of water and Spirit. And so again, an interesting concept. What does it mean? In other words, being born of water and Spirit is the equivalent of being born again. But two comments I guess I'd like to make. The first is just to reference you to a list of scriptures that I think gives us a fuller New Testament picture of what born of water and Spirit and born again represent. And you can piece together those in your own time. But forgive me if I jump ahead and don't explain every detail. Though many have tried to explain away baptism from this text, which Jesus alludes to here, Nicodemus and other Jews would have acknowledged water and Spirit are conjoined, are brought together in a lot of Old Testament verses. Sawyer read for us a verse from Ezekiel 36, which talks about God's divine act of restoring his people, at that time Israel, by means of what he says, water and Spirit. And for Jews, of course, they had a lot of ancient practices about ceremonial washings, which would involve water. It purifies them in their eyes. And so that kind of serves as the background for what Nicodemus should have understood by water, I guess. But at least they would have acknowledged that. For Jews, baptismal type washings were just common practice. This gives water and Spirit both vital significance. Both are equally important. Beyond the Old Testament, just look to the Gospel of John itself. Later in chapter 3, we read about what Jesus and John are doing, John the Baptist. In verse 23, now John also, verse 22, after this, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Judean countryside, where he spent some time with them and baptized. So Jesus is baptizing people. And verse 23, now John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because there was plenty of water, and people were coming and being baptized. And then chapter 4, verse 1, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had learned that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. And so basically the statement there is this: we can say that Jesus was baptizing, he was doing it through his disciples. And so what that connects with our text is this, that the water in verse 5 has to mean the same thing that it does in verse 22 to 23 in chapter 4, verse 1. And so I also just want to say this, that in a similar form, I guess, in John chapter 6, where we read the discourse that Jesus gives about him wanting people to eat his flesh and drink his blood clearly alludes to the Lord's Supper for us as Christians. Not for them at that very time that he said it, but for us. And so in a similar way, though Nicodemus might not understood all the details about Christian baptism, we know that this represents for us that very thing. What else could water mean? As one is baptized, faith is demonstrated, and the renewal of mind and body and spirit takes place as one starts their life over in faithful obedience to God, being born of water and spirit, or as Jesus puts it earlier in verse 5, born again, born from above. Before we just leave the story, before we conclude that Nicodemus was a bad guy, Nicodemus was uncommitted, he wasn't really a true believer, he wasn't really a follower, just simply a fan. I want to hold on to that and just mention a couple verses that we find later in John. One is John 7, verse 37 through 52, and the other is chapter 19, verses 38 to 42, where the only other times Nicodemus is mentioned are those two places. And so though we lose hope for this guy, his story doesn't end. In John 7, as the chief priests and Pharisees are talking about Jesus and how he's turning the crowds to him and how he needs to die, basically, Nicodemus stands up and takes the risk. Nicodemus comes to his side in support. And this demonstrates for us something more than just Nicodemus believing and acknowledging Jesus and who he is, but actually doing something for his cause. And as fans, there are moments in life where this is our crucial choice of whether to save one's pride, to save one's accomplishments, to save one's resources, to save one's image, or to risk everything. And Nicodemus does that, becoming a follower. And the second text is John 19, where after Jesus has been crucified, two men, Joseph of Arimathea and the same guy Nicodemus, come to his side, to the side of the cross to take him down and put him in a tomb, to give him a proper Jewish burial. And so in John 19, it's clear that Nicodemus is not hiding his faith anymore. He's not hiding his deep respect, but he's actually coming out and acknowledging through his actions what Jesus means to him. Not simply for Nicodemus a financial sacrifice, though he bought that costly myrrh and aloe. This was a gesture more than that. It was a sacrifice, again, of accomplishments, public and religious image, and at one time, just all those important things that Nicodemus held so dear for so long went out the window. Nicodemus was a follower, not just a fan. And so maybe as we take Nicodemus, put him aside, his example, and look inwardly at us, we see people who, may be conservative Christians, may be people who hold these values and beliefs dear, who stand for truth in our own way. And yet, we lose sight of what true faith looks like when it faces challenges, when there's that chance of risk and losing everything, and actually demonstrating through how we interact with people in our day-to-day lives what Christianity is all about. It's not something we keep to ourselves, not something that is just about us, but Christian faith requires and demands that we look to others for opportunities to serve and help people who need it. And so that's what born again, born of water and spirit Christians look like. They're people that have completely transformed who they are into people that look like, act like, talk like Jesus. And so this morning we sing a song of encouragement to invite anyone who needs to make that dedication through faith and baptism, but also for us Christians